Hola, soy Linda Rottenberg from Endeavor. I'm so glad to be joining you today. I'm actually pretty close, but I'm right now moderating one of our international selection panels to select the next class of Endeavor entrepreneurs, but glad I could at least be with you virtually. I'm here to just tell you a little bit about my own journey supporting high growth, what we call high impact entrepreneurs around the world, and to answer some of the questions that a number of you have been kind enough to write in advance. So just to tell you a little bit about my own journey, I co-founded Endeavor now 19 years ago. I had been living in Latin America after graduating from college and law school and escaping because I had no interest in practicing law, had gone and lived in Buenos Aires, and one day found myself in a taxi where the driver had an engineering degree. And this was now the early to mid 1990s, and people back in the US were talking about the IPOs of Yahoo and Netscape. And if you had an engineering degree, you were golden. So here's this engineer driving a taxi, and I couldn't understand why. And I kept asking him why he wasn't starting a business, and he kept using the word empresario. And I would say, no, it's not empresario, it's otra palabra. And we would go back and forth, and he looked at me and said, lady, there is no word like that here. And this is Latin America. No one's going to give me support or money to start my crazy idea. So I had that aha moment, went back to the US. Peter Kellner, my co-founder, and I decided to start Endeavor to support the journey of high-impact entrepreneurs from startup to scale-up. And I should say two things. Number one, no one thought this was a good idea. My parents thought that I should get a real job. Every person we spoke to said, this is nuts, it will never work. There are no entrepreneurs in Latin America, and even if you find them, no one will give them support or funding to scale. So I was known for a decade as La Chica Loca, and in fact, when we took Endeavor to the Middle East, the name carried over. So I'm Chica Loca proudly, and my motto is that crazy is a compliment, and that actually if you're not being called crazy, you're probably not thinking big enough. So that's the first thing you should know about me. And the second is that my favorite day at Endeavor came 5 or 6 years after that taxi ride, when our team in Brazil got a phone call from the Portuguese-Brazilian dictionary editor saying, in part because of Endeavor's work, he was adding the words empreendedor and empreendedorismo into the lexicon. Now, I thought that was pretty cool, although every time I tell this story, people email me and say, don't you know Christopher Columbus used the word emprendedor? And I think that's fine. Or people say, today, of course, there's a word. It's called emprendedor. But what's exciting to me is that really when you look back to 1997, there were no self-made role models in most of the countries where Endeavor now operates. And not only can kids throughout Latin America name some of our most successful entrepreneurs, the boys from Globant who took their Argentine software company public on the New York Stock Exchange last year, or Marcos Galperin of Mercado Libre, the eBay of Latin America that also went public, or Wences Casares that sold Patagon.com to Banco Santander, but then went on to create 6 more companies and is now one of the leaders of the Bitcoin movement in California. So not only can people throughout that continent say, if he can do it, if she can do it, I can too. But one of our more recent successes of an Endeavor entrepreneur in Turkey, a guy named Nevzat Eddin and his partner Melih Demiş, started a company called Yemek Sepeti, which is the seamless or open table of Turkey. Last year they sold the company for $589 million. It was the largest exit in Turkey's internet history. And again, 2 things happened that were pretty extraordinary after. Number one is in a country that doesn't have a concept of stock options, Melih and Nevzat took $27 million out of their own proceeds and distributed it among 150 employees of Yemek Sepeti, believing that everyone should share in the success of the company. CNN labeled Nevzat the world's best boss. But something even more extraordinary happened just this week, where the most important Turkish newspaper took a survey of all college-age students in the country and asked them to name their role models and did a top 10 list. And the number 3 most named role model Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook. Number 2 most commonly cited role model, Steve Jobs. Number 1, Nevzat Dean. So I think that what Endeavor is all about, when I reflect 19 years later, 25 countries, 1,200 entrepreneurs, generating now $8 billion in revenues, generating nearly 600,000 jobs. It's about the role model effect, this idea that these crazy ideas can become reality, and that the founders then tell their stories to inspire others, employ people who go on to become entrepreneurs themselves, mentor the next generation, become the angel investors, and create this pay it forward cycle that we've seen happen in community around the world. And the last thing I'll say about the Endeavor journey, which is relevant to you, is that we, a few years ago, started operating in Europe. So first started in Greece, and then added Spain, then Bulgaria, now Italy, and also some communities in the US that have been hard hit after the 2008 recession. And our belief is that while a lot of entrepreneurship focuses on the startup phase, and there are a lot of incubators and accelerators and great organizations out there supporting the startups, that where it gets hard is at the point you get stuck. And these inflection points where the entrepreneurs have to make pivotal decisions that can either break the company or take the company really big, that's the scale-up phase, and that's Endeavor's sweet spot. So we're super excited about many of the companies we've already found here in Spain that are at that scale-up inflection point. And can't wait for these stories to become these household names of people. And hopefully some of you will end up becoming Endeavor entrepreneurs. But what I'm here to talk about today is not just taking a company from startup to scale up, but the notion of what is an entrepreneur in today's world anyway, and is it just for people who want to create big companies? And my answer is actually no. I wrote a book in the last couple of years called Crazy as a Compliment, and the importance of zigging when everyone else zags. And it's really about how all of us, no matter what our aspirations or our jobs are, need to think and act like entrepreneurs. And I've spoken to so many people inside big companies who are terrified of taking a chance and fearing failure, or people who aren't loving their current jobs that have that business plan on the napkin for selling something at the farmer's market or for a new website or app, and they're also terrified of starting something and potentially risking it all and failing. And what I've come to learn is that today the biggest risk is taking no risk at all, that fear of failure is the biggest paralyzer, and today the big companies are the ones who are in the most trouble, I believe. When economies turn down, that's when entrepreneurs turn up. In the United States, half of the Fortune 500 companies were created in periods of recession and crisis and downturn. That's when entrepreneurs get their juices flowing. And I think today there's even more opportunities for these young, nimble startups to really start eating the lunch of the big companies. Which means if you get a job in one of these big companies, unless you're constantly adapting, unless you're agile, unless you take some chances, your job is not safe and your company is not safe either. So that's the first thing. My friend Michael Dell told me that there are only two people today, the quick and the dead. So be among the quick. But the other thing is that people associate entrepreneurship with a great amount of risk. But the entrepreneurs, and I've met thousands and thousands of some of the best entrepreneurs, they're not risk maximizers, they're risk minimizers. Everything they do is about taking steps to minimize and mitigate that risk. They're strategic risk takers, or as Richard Branson says, he focuses on contained disasters. So it's not about betting the farm and going all in. It's about, wagering a chicken at a time. And so the earliest thing you have to do, though, is convince yourself to take that leap of faith, that you know you're going to be called crazy. Your friends and family will be the ones who for sure call you crazy, so maybe don't talk to friends and family. Go onto the internet, go one friend away. Try to get people who believe in your idea. But know that that is the biggest risk, which is the jumping into the unknown. But then at every step of the way, you can find ways to reduce the amount of risk you actually take. The other thing people had asked me actually from IE is, well, is entrepreneurship a solo sport? Like, how do you feel about founders, co-founders? And what I would say is it's kind of a mixed bag. On the one hand, we see most of our entrepreneurs, I'd say at least 2/3 of the Endeavor entrepreneurs have founding teams. And I think the benefit of that is you need people with complementary skills. One man shows, one woman shows, period, end of story, do not scale. So at some point, you're going to have to find team members, supporters, investors, board members. And I think the people who start in teams have an easier job adjusting. So that's on the positive side. On the negative side, here's what happens. Especially in places like Spain and Europe and Latin America, people start companies with their friends and with their families. And oftentimes, what starts all aligned and everyone's on board and the roles are clear gets confused. And either we see companies with 3 co-CEOs, the number of times that works, one person has to be in charge. Or you find a brother in accounting, a sister in marketing. I always say that Endeavor 101 is how to fire your mother-in-law and still show up for family dinner. But it's often not the mother-in-law, it's often your father, your sister, your best friend. And one thing I've learned is that you need a startup prenup. So no one wants to talk about this, but this is the best piece of advice I think I can give you. If you're founding something, startup prenup. You've got to have the terms laid out so that if one person wants to grow a company and one person wants to sit on the beach, or if one person was the chief finance officer but suddenly the skills don't match the scaling company, you have a way to settle things and keep the relationships intact. So those are 2 pieces of advice. Take some risk in terms of moving forward with your idea, but then work hard to reduce the risk. And if you're starting something, make sure you set the rules in place. So the next question one of you asked me was, okay, we've taken some risk, but what if we fail? And how do you deal with failure? Actually, 2 of my favorite stories involve failure. One is just an idea that was launched by Ratan Tata, who was at one point the wealthiest man in India. And at 70, right before he was about to retire from the Tata Group, which is a conglomerate from everything from steel to automobiles to tea, he gave a prize throughout the company for the best failed idea. What he realized is that failure is a gold mine, and that it really is true, the cliches that we learn from the failure, and those who are able to harness that and combine with the contained disasters that Richard Branson talked about, make sure that actually it moves the company forward. In fact, one of my favorite company stories is the story of WD-40. I don't know if any of you have used that on your car doors or on any squeaky door. But the story of this starts in the 1950s when a chemist named Norm Larsen was trying to solve the rust industry, rust in the aerospace industry. And he knew it had something to do with water displacement. He goes to his lab, comes up with a formula, it doesn't work. Number 2, doesn't work. Third formula fails. 4th fails. Goes on and on. He can't get it right. Finally, the 40th formula works. He takes it to General Dynamics. They use it in these AI missiles, but the workers find this so effective that they're sneaking some of the product home in their pails to help with their doors. And Norm Larsen is like, well, wait a minute, I think I have a consumer product here. And he builds this can and comes up with a name by looking at his lab books. Water displacement, 40th formula. So the idea of failure is embedded in the very name of this company. And today the CEO, Gary Ridge, says that every time anyone in the company talks about a new idea, they have to talk about what went right, but also what went wrong and what failed. And so he embeds these learning moments by talking about failure. And I think that the founders of Agile, we actually practice Agile family practice. My house actually uses Agile computer processing methods for our family meetings. But Agile is all about coming in and every day asking what went wrong, what went right, how can we get better, breaking up down projects into micro projects, breaking down groups into small iterative teams. Jeff Bezos of Amazon has this great phrase that everything that gets done by 2 pizza teams, meaning if your team is too big to feed with 2 pizzas, you have too big a team, you have to break it down. So I think using agile practices and constantly iterating means that if you do fail, it's not the end of everything. And that what I would say is that in today's world, you don't need hundreds of millions of dollars, even $1 million to start. It turns out that in the US at least, the fastest growing companies, the Inc. 500 companies, over 50% were started with under $5,000, and over 60% were started with under $10,000. So it really doesn't take a lot of money, and today with Kickstarter, with so many social networks, with Facebook, I think you can pretty quickly get feedback on your ideas, and the biggest problem is actually people stopping themselves before they take that chance. The great golfer Bobby Jones has this quote that golf is a game played on a 5-inch course, the distance between your ears. And I believe the same holds true with entrepreneurship. It's a mind game, and giving yourself permission to launch your crazy idea is the hardest thing to do, but that you are really the only person you have to convince. So the last thing I would say is, if you have an idea, whether it's to change something in your existing company, whether it's to start a new company, take an old company to the next level, a family business, we see a lot of those at Endeavor, or to start a social enterprise, the only person who can give you permission to launch that crazy idea is you. It's not your parents, it's not some venture capitalist, it's not a banker, it's not your best friend, it's you. And you're the hardest person you'll have to convince. So that's my thoughts on being an entrepreneur. And the last thing I'll say before I go back to moderating our selection panel here in Madrid is that I couldn't be more excited about the innovation and opportunities we're seeing now in Spain. I think that it's almost harder in a traditional but highly developed society like Spain to start something new, to disrupt the status quo. But yet I really feel that time has never been better for entrepreneurs. We're seeing more and more young people taking chances, and I can't wait to hopefully meet many of you, and hopefully you will join our movement, either as mentors or entrepreneurs or otherwise. But I really believe that the next decade and the decade after of Spain is going to be better for people like you. So good luck, suerte, y chao.